Hi, 8th grade. Today I'm on part 5, The Whistler. This is our last week of reading together, and then I hope you continue the book over the summer. And when we get back together in school when you're freshmen, can you believe it? I want you to come back and tell me how you felt about the book. I'm going to finish it with you this summer. All right, so I'm on part 5, The Whistler. I'm going to read to you from 241 to about 250, 256. And then you're going to go on to about 290. Okay? All right. The Floating Book, Part 1. A book floated down the Amper River. A boy jumped in, caught up to it, and held it in his right hand. He grinned. He stood waist deep in the icy Decemberish water. "How about a kiss, Sommench?" he said. The surrounding air was a lovely, gorgeous, nauseating cold, not to mention the concrete ache of the water thickening from his toes to his hips. How about a kiss? How about a kiss? Poor Rudy. A small announcement about Rudy Steiner. He didn't deserve to die the way he did. In your visions, excuse me, you see the sloppy edges of paper still stuck to his fingers. You see a shivering blonde fringe. Preemptively, you conclude, as I would, that Rudy died the very same day of hypothermia. He did not. Recollections like these merely remind me that he was not deserving of the fate that met him a little under 2 years later. On many counts, taking a boy like Rudy was robbery. So much life, so much to live for. Yet somehow I'm certain he would have loved to see the frightening rubble and the swelling of the sky on the night he passed away. He'd have cried and turned and smiled if only he could see the book thief on her hands and knees next to his decimated body. He'd have been glad to witness her kissing his dusty, bomb-hit lips. Yes, I know it. In the darkness of my dark-beating heart, I know. He'd have loved it all right. You see? Even death has a heart. So now we know Rudy's going to die in about 2 years. And it sounds like he dies in a bombing. The Gamblers, a seven-sided die. Of course I'm being rude. I'm spoiling the ending, not only of the entire book, but of this particular piece of it. I've given you 2 events in advance because I don't have much interest in building mystery. Mystery bores me. It chores me. I know what happens, and so do you. It's the machinations that wheel us there that aggravate, perplex, interest, and astound me. There are many things to think of. There's much story. Certainly there's a book called The Whistler, which we really need to discuss, along with exactly how it came to be floating down the Amper River in the time leading up to Christmas 1941. What should we deal with all of that first, don't you think? It's settled then. We will. It started with gambling. Roll a die by hiding a Jew, and this is how you live. This is how it looks. 1. The Haircut, mid-April 1941. Life, at least, was starting to mimic normality with much force. Hans and Rosa Huberman, sorry guys, I'm having a hard time reading today, were arguing in the living room, even if it was much quieter than it used to be. Liesel, in typical fashion, was an onlooker. The argument originated the previous night in the basement, where Hans and Max were sitting with paint cans, words, and drop sheets. Max asked if Rosa might be able to cut his hair at some stage. "It's getting me in the eyes," he'd said, to which Hans had replied, "I'll see what I can do." Now Rosa was rifling through the drawers. Her words were shoved back to Papa with the rest of the junk. "Where are those damn scissors?" "Not in the one below? I've been through that one already." "Maybe you missed 'em." "Do I look blind?" She raised her head and bellowed, "Liesel! I'm right here." Hans cowered. "Gosh darn it, woman." Sorry, I've got my 3-year-old in here with me. "Deafen me, why don't you?" "Quiet, sock girl." Rosa went on rifling and addressed the girl. "Liesel, where are the scissors?" But Liesel had no idea either. "Sommench, you're useless, aren't you? Leave her out of it." More words were delivered back and forth from elastic-haired woman to silver-eyed man, till Rosa slammed the drawer. "I'll probably make a lot of mistakes on him anyway." Mistakes? Papa looked ready to tear his own hair out by that stage, but his voice became a barely audible whisper. "Who the heck's going to see him?"
I just found a dead bug in here.
Ew, gross. We'll have to take care of it, okay? I'm reading my book to my kids, so hang on. He motioned to speak again, but was distracted by the feathery appearance of Max Vandenberg, who stood politely, embarrassed, in the doorway. He carried his own scissors and came forward, handing them not to Hans or Rosa, but to the 12-year-old girl. She was the calmest option. His mouth quivered a moment before he said, "Would you?" Liesel took the scissors and opened them. They were rusty and shiny in different areas. She turned to Papa, and when he nodded, she followed Max down to the basement. The Jew sat on a paint can. A small drop sheet was wrapped around his shoulders. "As many mistakes as you want," he told her. Papa parked himself on the steps. Lisa lifted the first tufts of Max Vandenberg's hair. As she cut the feathery strands, she wondered at the sound of the scissors. Not the snipping noise, but the grinding of each metal arm as it cropped each group of fibers. When the job was done, a little severe in places, a little crooked in others, she walked upstairs with the hair in her hands and fed it into the stove. She lit a match and watched as the crump shriveled and sank, orange and red. Again, Max was in the doorway, this time at the top of the basement steps. "Thanks, Liesel." His voice was tall and husky, with the sound of hidden in it of a hidden smile. No sooner had he spoken than he disappeared again, back into the ground. Number 2. The newspaper, early May. There's a Jew in my basement. There's a Jew in my basement. Sitting on the floor of the mayor's room full of books, Liesel Memminger heard these words. A bag of washing was at her side, and the ghostly figure of the mayor's wife was sitting hunched drunk over at the desk. In front of her, Liesel read The Whistler, pages 22 and 23. She looked up. She imagined herself walking over, gently tearing some fluffy hair to the side, and whispering in the woman's ear, "There's a Jew in my basement." As the book quivered in her lap, the secret sat in her mouth. It made itself comfortable. It crossed its legs. "I should be getting home." This time she actually spoke. Her hands were shaking. Despite a trace of sunshine in the distance, a gentle breeze rode through the open window, coupled with rain that came in like sawdust. When Liesel placed the book back into position, the woman's chair stubbed the floor and she made her way over. It was always like this at the end. The gentle rings of sorrowful wrinkles swelled a moment as she reached across and retrieved the book. She offered it to the girl. Liesel shied away. "No," she said, "thank you. I have enough books at home. Maybe another time. I'm rereading something else with my papa. You know, the one I stole from the fire that night." The mayor's wife nodded. If there was one thing about Liesel Memminger, her thieving was not gratuitous. She only stole books on which she felt was a need-to-have basis. Currently, she had enough. She'd gone through the Mudmen 4 times now and was enjoying her reacquaintance with the shoulder shrug. Also, each night before bed, she would open a fail-safe guide to grave digging. Buried deep inside it, the standover man resided. She mouthed the words and touched the birds. She turned the noisy pages slowly. "Goodbye, Frau Hermann." She exited the library, walked down the floorboard hall, and out the monstrous doorway. As was her habit, she stood for a while on the steps, looking at Molking beneath her. The town that afternoon was covered in a yellow mist, which stroked the rooftops as if they were pets and filled up the streets like a bath. There's some beautiful similes there. When she made it down to Munich Street, the book thief swerved in and out of the umbrellaed men and women, a raincoat girl who made her way without shame from one garbage can to another, like clockwork. "There!" She laughed up at the coppery clouds, celebrating before reaching in and taking the mangled newspaper. Although the front and back pages were streaked with black tears of print, she folded it neatly in half and tucked it under her arm. It had been like this each Thursday for the past few months. Thursday was the only delivery day left for Liesel Memminger now, and it was usually able to provide some sort of dividend. She could never dampen the feeling of victory each time she found a Molking Express or any other publication. Finding a newspaper was a good day. If it was a paper in which the crossword wasn't done, it was a great day. She would make her way home, shut the door behind her, and take it down to Max Vandenberg. "Crossword?" he would ask. "Empty." "Excellent." The Jew would smile as he accepted the package of paper and started reading in the ration light of the basement. Often, Liesel would watch him as he focused on reading the paper, completed the crossword, and then started to reread it front to back. With the weather warming, Max remained downstairs all the time. During the day, the basement door was left open to allow the small bay of daylight to reach him from the corridor. The hall itself was not exactly bathed in sunshine, but in certain situations you take what you get. Doer light was better than none, and they needed to be frugal. The kerosene had not yet approached a dangerously low level, but it was best to keep its usage to a minimum. Liesel would usually sit on some drop sheets. She'd read while Max completed those crosswords. They sat a few meters apart, speaking very rarely, and there was really only the noise of turning pages. Often she also left her books for Max to read while she was at school. Where Hans Huberman and Eric Vandenberg were ultimately united by music, Max and Liesel were held together by the quiet gathering of words. "Hi, Max." "Hi, Liesel." They would sit and read. At times she would watch him. She decided that he could best be summed up as a picture of pale concentration. Beige-colored skin, a swamp in each eye, and he breathed like a fugitive, desperate yet soundless. It was only his chest that gave him away for something alive. Increasingly, Liesel would close her eyes and ask Max to quiz her on the words she was continually getting wrong, and she would swear if they still escaped her. She would then stand and paint those words to the wall, anywhere up to a dozen times. Together, Max Vandenberg and Liesel Memminger would take in the odor of paint fumes and cement. Bye, Max. Bye, Liesel. In bed, she would lie awake, imagining him below in the basement. In her bedtime visions, he always slept fully clothed, shoes included, just in case he needed to flee again. He slept with one eye open. Dice number 3, The Weatherman, mid-May. Liesel opened the door and her mouth simultaneously. On Himmel Street, her team had trounced Rudy's 6-1, and triumphant, she burst into the kitchen, telling Mama and Papa all about the goal she'd scored. She then rushed down to the basement to describe it blow by blow to Max, who put down his newspaper and intently listened and laughed with the girl. When the story of the goal was complete, there was silence for a few good minutes, until Max looked slowly up. Would you do something for me, Liesel? Still excited by her Himmel Street goal, the girl jumped from the drop sheets. She did not say it, but her movement clearly showed me her intent to provide exactly what he wanted. You told me all about the goal, he said, but I don't know what sort of day it is up there. I don't know if you scored it in the sun or if the clouds have covered everything. His hand prodded at his short-cropped hair, and his swampy eyes pleaded for the simplest of simple things. Could you go up and tell me how the weather looks? Naturally, Liesel hurried up the stairs. She stood a few feet from the spit-stained door and turned on the spot, observing the sky. When she returned to the basement, she told him, The sky is blue today, Max, and there's a big, long cloud, and it's stretched out like a rope. At the end of it, the sun is like a yellow hole. Max, at that moment, knew that only a child could have given him a weather report like that. On the wall, he painted a long, tightly knotted rope with a dripping yellow sun at the end of it, as if you could dive right into it. On the ropey cloud, he drew 2 figures, a thin girl and a withering Jew, and they were walking, arms balanced, toward that dripping sun. Beneath the picture, he wrote the following sentence. It was a Monday, and they walked on a tightrope to the sun. Dice number 3, The Boxer, end of May. Let me see how many pages I've read, guys. Okay. For Max Vandenberg, there was cool cement and plenty of time to spend with it. The minutes were cruel, hours were punishing. Standing above him at all moments of awakeness was the hand of time, and it didn't hesitate to wring him out. It smiled and squeezed and let him live. What great malice there could be in allowing something to live. At least once a day, Hans Heberman would descend the basement steps and share a conversation. Rosa would occasionally bring a spare crust of bread. It was when Liesel came down, however, that Max found himself most interested in life again. Initially, he tried to resist, but it was harder every day that the girl appeared, each time with a new weather report, either of pure blue sky, cardboard clouds, or a sun that had broken through like God sitting down after he'd eaten too much for his dinner. When he was alone, his most distinct feeling was of disappearance. All of his clothes were gray, whether they'd started out that way or not, from his pants to his woolen sweater to the jacket that dripped from him now like water. He often checked if his skin was flaking, for it was as if he were dissolving. What he needed was a new series of projects. The first was exercise. He started with push-ups, lying stomach down on the cool basement floor, then hoisting himself up. It felt like his arms snapped at each elbow, and he envisaged his heart seeping out of him and dropping pathetically to the ground. As a teenager in Stuttgart, he could reach 50 push-ups at a time. Now, at the age of 24, perhaps 15 pounds lighter than his usual weight, he could barely make it to 10. After a week, he was completing 3 sets each of 16 push-ups and 22 sit-ups. When he was finished, he would sit against the basement wall with his paint can friends, feeling his pulse in his teeth. His muscles felt like cake. He wondered at times if pushing himself like this was even worth it. Sometimes, though, when his heartbeat neutralized and his body became functional again, he would turn off the lamp and stand in the darkness of the basement. He was 24, but he could still fantasize. In the blue corner, he quietly commentated, we have the champion of the world, the Aryan masterpiece, the Führer. You guys remember who the Führer is? That's right, it's Hitler. He breathed and turned, and in the red corner, we have the Jewish rat-faced challenger, Max Vandenberg. A lot of propaganda characterized Jews as being rats, and they always had red in the propaganda. Around him, it all materialized. White light lowered itself into a boxing ring, and a crowd stood and murmured, that magical sound of many people talking all at once. How could every person there have so much to say at the same time? The ring itself was perfect canvas, lovely ropes. Even the stray hairs of each thickened string were flawless, gleaming in the tight white light. The room smelled like cigarettes and beer. Diagonally across, Adolf Hitler stood in the corner with his entourage. His legs poked out from a red and white robe with a black swastika burned into its back. His mustache was knitted to his face. Words were whispered to him from his trainer, Goebbels. He bounced foot to foot and he smiled. He smiled loudest when the ring announcer listed his many achievements, which were all vociferously applauded by the adoring crowd. "Undefeated," the ringmaster proclaimed, "over many a Jew, and over any other threat to the German ideal. Herr Führer," he concluded, "we salute you." The crowd, mayhem. Next, when everyone had settled down, came the challenger. The ringmaster swung over toward Max, who stood alone in the challenger's corner. No robe, no entourage, just a lonely young Jew with dirty breath, a naked chest, and tired hands and feet. Naturally, his shorts were gray. He too moved from foot to foot, but it was kept at a minimum to conserve energy. He'd done a lot of sweating in the gym to make the weight. "The challenger," sang the ringmaster, "of," and he paused for effect, "Jewish blood." The crowd oohed like human ghouls. "Weighing in at," the rest of the speech was not heard. It was overrun with the abuse from the bleachers, and Max watched as his opponent was derobed and came to the middle to hear the rules and shake hands. "Guten Tag, Herr Hitler," Max nodded, but the Führer only showed him his yellow teeth, then covered them back up again with his lips. "Gentlemen," a stout referee in black pants and blue shirt began. A bow tie was fixed to his throat. "First and foremost, we want a good, clean fight." He addressed only the Führer now. "Unless, of course, Herr Hitler, you begin to lose. Should this occur, I'll be quite willing to turn a blind eye to any unconscionable tactics you might employ to grind this piece of Jewish stench and filth into the canvas." He nodded with great courtesy. "Is that clear?" The Führer spoke his first word then. "Crystal." To Max, the referee extended a warning. "As for you, my Jewish chum, I'd watch my step very closely if I were you, very closely indeed." And they were sent back to their respective corners. A brief quiet ensued. The bell. First out was the Führer, awkward-legged and bony, running at Max and jabbing him firmly in the face. The crowd vibrated, the bells still in their ears, and their satisfied smiles hurdled the ropes. The smoky breath of Hitler steamed from his mouth as his hands bucked at Max's face, collecting him several times, on the lips, the nose, the chin, and Max had still not ventured out of his corner. To absorb the punishment, he held up his hands, but the Führer then aimed at his ribs, his kidneys, his lungs. Oh, the eyes, the Führer's eyes! They were so deliciously brown, like Jews' eyes. And they were so determined that even Max stood transfixed for a moment as he caught sight of them between the healthy blur of punching gloves. There was only one round and it lasted hours, and for the most part nothing changed. The Führer pounded away at the punching bag Jew. Jewish blood was everywhere, like red rain clouds on the white sky canvas at their feet. Eventually Max's knees began to buckle, his cheekbones silently moaned, and the Führer's delighted face still chipped away, until depleted, beaten and broken, the Jew flopped to the floor. First a roar, then silence. The referee counted. He had a gold tooth and a plethora of nostril hair. Slowly Max Vandenberg, the Jew, rose to his feet and made himself upright. His voice wobbled, an invitation. "Come on, Führer," he said, and this time, when Adolf Hitler set upon his Jewish counterpart, Max stepped aside and plunged him into the corner. He punched him 7 times, aiming on each occasion for only one thing. The mustache. With the 7th punch, he missed. It was the Führer's chin that sustained the blow. All at once, Hitler hit the ropes and creased forward, landing on his knees. This time there was no count. The referee flinched in the corner. The audience sank down back to their beer. On his knees, the Führer tested himself for blood and straightened his hair right to left. When he returned to his feet, much to the approval of the 1,000-strong crowd, he edged forward and did something quite strange. He turned his back on the Jew and took the gloves from his fists. The crowd was stunned. "He's given up," someone whispered, but within moments Adolf Hitler was standing on the ropes and he was addressing the arena. "My fellow Germans," he called, "you can see something here tonight, can't you?" Bare-chested, victory-eyed, he pointed over at Max. "You can see that what we face is something far more sinister and powerful than we ever imagined. Can you see that?" They answered, "Yes, Führer." "Can you see that this enemy has found its ways, its despicable ways through our armor, and that clearly I cannot stand up here alone and fight him?" The words were visible. They dropped from his mouth like jewels. "Look at him. Take a good look." They looked at the bloody Max Vandenberg, As we speak, he's plotting his way into your neighborhood. He's moving in next door. He's infesting you with his family, and he's about to take you over. Hitler glanced at him a moment with disgust. He will soon own you, until it is he who stands not at the counter of your grocery shop, but sits in the back smoking his pipe. Before you know it, you'll be working for him at minimum wage, while he can hardly walk from the weight in his pockets. Will you simply stand there and let him do this? Will you? Stand by as your leaders did in the past when they gave your land to everybody else, when they sold your country for the price of a few signatures? Will you stand out there powerless? Or, and now he stepped one rung higher, will you climb into this ring with me? Max shook. Horror stuttered in his stomach. Adolf finished him. Will you climb in here so that we can defeat this enemy together? In the basement of 33 Himmel Street, Max Vandenberg could feel the fists of an entire nation. One by one, they climbed into the ring and beat him down. They made him bleed. They let him suffer, millions of them, until one last time, when he gathered himself to his feet, he watched the next person climb through the ropes. It was a girl, and as she slowly crossed the canvas, he noticed a tear torn down her left cheek. In her right hand was a newspaper. The crossword, she gently said, is empty, and she held it out to him. Dark. Nothing but dark now. Just basement. Just Jew. All right, so there we have Max fantasizing about being in a fight with Hitler, and it's obviously not a fair fight because then Hitler uses his very powerful rhetoric, his speeches that he gave to convince an entire nation to come against the Jews. So what we see here is that Hitler's power was not in his military. Yeah, his military was great, but what made Hitler so effective was his ability to convince an entire nation to do something. And the way he did that is through fear. Almost all big wartime decisions have been made in fear. And fear is the most powerful emotion somebody can use to convince you to do something. So as you guys continue reading, I want you to keep that in your head. And in what ways is fear being used to convince you to do something or to not do something? And I think there's two sides to this coin right now in our current life. There's fear about the virus and there's fear about the economy. And we cannot let fear rule our decisions on either one. We have to use our intelligence. So I really want you guys to focus on that. Try not to give in to fear, but use that beautiful brain that you've been blessed with and think things through. Use evidence. Ask the tough questions. Where did that come from? How do you know that source can be trusted? And use hard, good evidence to make your decisions. Don't let fear stop you. All right. I love you so much. Keep reading. You have about 30 more pages to go.